You are listening to AP Taylor Swift, the podcast for Swifties who are all about the lyrics. We're your hosts. I'm Jen.
I'm Muncie.
And I'm Jody.
And we are your unofficial professors of Taylor Swift.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of AP Taylor Swift. You have just entered summer school. We are so excited for the next few weeks. It's summer, school's out, and we're doing something really fun where we decided to change things up a little bit and do shorter bite-sized episodes where we revisit some of our favorite topics from the last year, but apply them to the Tortured Poets department. We have a new album since we started doing this.
We have a new album as if
we have. I mean, she did say it's ours now.
It is ours.
And there's so much to discuss with that. And we had such amazing conversations in the last few months that we just thought it would be really fun to revisit and apply those learnings to a new album. So welcome to our first episode of Summer School.
Summer School's in session. Yeah, so we are going to start back at almost the very beginning with episode 5, where we did a show and tell on toxic relationships. Won't go into all of it. You're going to have to go back and listen to that episode to learn a bit more, but at a very high level, toxic relationships, what does it mean? According to psychology today, relationships that might exhibit isolation, ongoing disagreements, blame, jealousy, dishonesty, denial, gaslighting, might be undermined, lack of support or compassion. So I don't know, maybe there's a song or two on the Tortured Poets department that relates to this. What do you guys think?
Do you think? I don't know. That seems maybe a stretch.
Maybe it's a stretch.
Hey,
we'll see how it goes.
We'll do our best.
And one of the reasons that this was such an interesting topic for us to bring up the first time is it's not necessarily a literary theory. However, we did talk about how toxic relationships are very common.
Spoiler alert.
Common tropes or common themes found in literary works, poetry. You kind of have this idea of the tortured artist that sometimes is tortured because of toxic relationships. We're getting right into this album. So anyways.
Let's do it.
That is the perfect transition. Yeah, well, we will all discuss it, but the first song was a song that I really wanted to discuss, which is the Tortured Poets department itself, which is, of course, track number 2, and it was written by Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff. So I love that you talked about literature because I'm going to make it literary right away. This song had a couple things that were interesting to me, and I'm gonna go through it very quickly, but then I have a question at the end that I want us to discuss for a couple of minutes. So I'm gonna kind of rapid fire some stuff here, but we're gonna end a question. First and foremost, this song to me really captures what you just said, the tortured artist thing. You have things like, but you're in self-sabotage mode, throwing spikes down on the road. But I've seen this episode and still love the show. Who else decodes you? Which is a very artistic type of thing to say. And then you have, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the Tortured Poets moment, where essentially she says, you told Lucy you'd kill yourself if I ever leave, and I had said that to Jack about you, so I felt seen. Everyone we know understands why it's meant to be, because we're crazy.
That is wild.
It is wild. It also immediately reminded me of Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley's real life relationship. I will put links in the show notes. I'm not going to go into the whole thing now, but to start off their relationship, which can tell you so much about it, he was still married to someone else, and they eloped into, I think they went to France together and essentially claimed they were married. It was a different time, so things were complicated, but he was still with someone else. She was quite young. They had a very tumultuous relationship. I believe she was widowed quite young as well. I don't believe they were together that long. Many of these elements of very intense, they seemed very passionate, but then they would fight a lot. They had a lot of difficulty, but they were very artistically supportive of each other. So these things of, I've seen this episode and still loved you, who else decodes you? They helped each other with their writing. Of course, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. How would Percy feel about the fact that Mary is way more famous than him now? That would be a fun conversation for a different podcast.
And Frankenstein was a thematic element in this album.
Yes, yeah.
As a whole.
Yes, which is a great connection.
And he himself was a poet. Mixed reviews on what he was like.
We went way deep, just like first song in summer school. We're like, here you go. Here's all the literary knowledge you need.
Well, the question I wanted to get to, that this song, and I think is a theme we'll revisit, so we don't have to answer it right now. By all accounts, Mary and Percy did genuinely love each other. They were truly did connect. It doesn't mean it was an easy relationship, but they were, for most accounts, don't seem to have regretted it. Seem to have been really happy with their decision, even if it was difficult. And I think that's a thread I see, but I really see in the song of, to me, if I were in this moment feeling this way, I would think that is kind of toxic. But I do have moments where I probably have felt this way because of the love I do have for my partner. And I think art gives us an interesting opportunity to say, for a little bit I felt this way. What if for this art I expand this moment? And the intensity and the passion versus stability and boringness is a theme we've seen in her music.
Yes.
And I wanted to just start off with that of passion does not mean toxic, but there's a thin line here. And that was the question I wanted to ask.
Exactly. And I think we talked about this a lot in episode 5 when we talked about toxic relationships and what is that fine line, and how if we see some of these signs, do they have to be perpetual? Do they have to be repetitive? Also the difference between what stage in life you're at. And if you're in a teenage relationship, you may experience some things and, okay, you just kind of have to learn it. But if you're an adult and you're hearing a partner say certain things, wait a second, that's not okay. We know better. And so I think you bring up a really good point that we'll definitely see as we progress through these songs, which is how much of this is a moment of passion and just deep love and affection, and how much of this is repetitive and a pattern that is a problem. And I think that's why when we were like, oh, let's do the topic toxic relationships with the Tortured Poets Department, I'm like, here you go. It's 31 songs that can fit into this topic.
Yeah, I think the hints in this song are, like you said, Jen, the who else decodes you, the self-sabotage, you'd kill yourself if I ever leave. And this is definitely a theme throughout this album, which is love each other, very intense love, very passionate, to the point of almost self-sabotage or violence, things like that. It'll come up a few more times in some of the other songs. In our original episode, in episode 5, we did talk about some examples of relationships. We talked about Tolerate It. I think we talked about the Fitzgeralds in great length at that time, Zelda Fitzgerald. And so I think it is debatable how toxic it could really be. Is there a little bit of toxic relationship in every relationship is really the question that you're asking, right? And we even talked about how before certain generations, because there was this power dynamic between men and women, almost every relationship to some extent was a toxic relationship. And by modern standards, we've evolved to be able to recognize that and try to fix that over time. But certainly that can become the basis of art where you really explore that. Maybe it's the art that's actually helped us even get to this point.
Yeah, and there's a difference between difficulty and moments of pain or discomfort in a relationship, and something like, for it to be toxic, it needs to be
a long period of time.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And the other thing I loved about, and we keep going back to episode 5, was it wasn't just romantic relationships that we talked about. I think here we have a romantic one, but I feel like in our next song, potentially we have a different type of toxic relationship in But Daddy, I Love Him.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think what's interesting going from Tortured Poets Department to But Daddy, I Love Him is the romantic relationship itself narratively doesn't necessarily have to be different as we go from Tortured Poets to But Daddy, I Love Him, because in But Daddy, I Love Him, our protagonist is still in a relationship that no one else likes and no one else believes in, which totally can work with the Tortured Poets Department. The toxic relationship, in my opinion, in But Daddy, I Love Him, which, hold on, I should pause and give credit where credit is due. But Daddy, I Love Him is track 6. It was written by Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner, not Aaron Swift.
Called Aaron Swift.
I was about to. They all just take her last name. It's the new tradition. I support it. In this song, the toxic relationship is with essentially the town, and I would argue with the concept of tradition in some ways.
Ooh,
because we have lines like, I just learned these people only raise you to cage you. Sarah's and Hannah's in their Sunday best, clutching their pearls, sighing, what a mess. And also, God save the most judgmental creeps who say they want what's best for me, sanctimoniously performing soliloquies I'll never see. To me, because at the end of the song, her family comes around, that ultimately what's going wrong here is the town has, in some ways, a tradition, a set of rules of what they believe is best. And our protagonist in the narrative of the song is not adhering to that. And so therefore they are, I don't want to say shunning, but they're very much rejecting her. They're pushing her to the outside. They're trying to force her to conform, and she's refusing. And so then therefore it's becoming a huge problem. And I think the toxicity there, in my opinion, is this
Absolutely.
rigid adherence to these
Rigid
traditions.
adherence, and also misunderstanding, unsupported, lack of compassion and understanding for how this person is feeling and that this is a relationship that they love. So I think I absolutely agree with you. I think I would take it a step further to say that she's using the townspeople as a metaphor or a stand-in for her fans and her critics, who famously were, again, we don't go into rumors, but we do talk about what was happening in the world. We know very clearly that fans were disapproving, of a relationship that she was in at the time that she wrote this. And so I think it's very clear what she is saying here, which is essentially saying a toxic relationship with her fans.
And even if there is one relationship that fans maybe were particularly disapproving of,
or any of them,
I was just going to say, like, in many of her relationships, the fact that she has had so many relationships,
great point,
period, people have always felt the need to comment that. And so this song, yeah, definitely. I think the way that the title is, you kind of go in. I remember before this came out, we were all talking about how this was kind of similar to Love Story in some ways, like the grown-up version of that. You go in thinking maybe the toxic relationship is with the parents or with her father, but really when you do get through the song, it's much more a commentary on society and the people who feel the need to point and comment when it's not really their place at all.
The reason I specifically said tradition too is I did have a literary reference. In a weird way, the song reminded me of The Lottery, which is a terrifying short story by Shirley Jackson.
I love that short story, though.
Which I will spoil for you right now, but the links will be in the show notes. Essentially, in the short story, you are having this build up to this town-wide lottery where someone's name is drawn. You think it's going to be maybe a fun event or someone's going to win something. And then the person who wins is stoned to death by the town. And there's a lot going on in that story. But one of the critiques is no one really knows why they do it. It's just tradition. That's just the way it's always been done. And there may have been a reason a long time ago, but as time goes on, people keep doing it just because it's the way it's been done. And I felt a lot of that theme in here of, well, this isn't how you do things, or this isn't what you're supposed to do. There's a path here. There's an appropriate thing for you to do that everyone on the outside has just decided this is how things are done. I've seen so many comparisons of, it's weird that she doesn't have kids yet. You're supposed to have a husband and kids by now, even if you are successful. Look at Beyonce, look at all these other people. And the idea that there's this specific path you're supposed to be on, that people are clutching their pearls when you're veering from that path, was what I was seeing a lot in this song.
I just wanted to say one last thing before we move on, which is that this is a happy song, or a victorious song too. Even though it's a toxic relationship, you do feel that overcoming, which I think is interesting and rare in these kind of songs that we've talked about in the past. Usually they're just really, really depressing. So I love that. I love that we can sing along and feel empowered.
We love it. I love that it was added to this set list too for the Eras tour, which is along with our next song, which is Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, track 10. And this is from Just Taylor Swift Alone. Similar to But Daddy, I Love Him. I see this not as a toxic relationship, not as a romantic relationship, but with a toxic relationship with fans, critics, music industry, just people at large, particularly the lines, I was tame, I was gentle, till the circus life made me mean. And then the very end of the song, you caged me, then you called me crazy. I am what I am because you trained me. So who's afraid of me? Yes, go ahead.
Can I just say,
Of course.
I love the internet's interpretation that this is the pet song and the toxic relationship is pets yelling at their owners.
What do you mean? I didn't see that.
Have you not seen?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh. There is a whole world of social media. I'm really trying to film my own cats because surely they feel this way about me as well. But there's a whole version where you have like the most adorable fur balls being like, well, you should be.
Okay, I love that. I'm going to have to spend more time on TikTok in order to see that, or maybe now that we've talked about it, it'll show up on my For You page. But what I love about this song, again, I do love the songs where she's talking about a relationship that is not romantic, particularly Monty, for the reason that you were saying earlier, which is that in so much of Taylor Swift's career, she was criticized for just writing breakup songs and just writing songs about ex-boyfriends or boyfriends, and that's not the case when you actually listen to her music. And so I really enjoy it when pretty explicitly it's not about romance. I mean, listen, it could be there could be romantic partners that are the you in this song, but it is so much bigger than that, in this idea that everything that the royal's not the word, universal you has done to her is what has made her who she is. And if you are afraid of that, if you are disapproving of that and judging her, well, you did this. You are what created this. And so I think, again, I go back to the definitions of toxic relationships, of isolation, blame, jealousy, dishonesty. What does that do to a person? What does that breaks somebody down, that toughens them up, that makes them change who they are, puts on defenses, and that creates a persona and a personality and experiences that somebody else has created. And I think it's very similar here. That's what we're seeing in the song.
Yeah, still creates the tortured soul, very much lends itself to creating that tortured poet. And that is what I love so much about this album, is that we all go in thinking it's all about the relationships. And it is, to an extent, maybe, probably.
To an extent.
But it does feel more about other kinds of relationships and the fans and the media and societies.
It's a much more multifaceted album than anybody expected, which also just makes me think that we just underestimated her entirely. Like, we did that to ourselves, right? We all heard the name, the Tortured Poets Department, and we saw the track lists, and everybody assumed that it was just about her ex-boyfriend and that this was just going to be dragging her ex-boyfriend.
And actually
it wasn't anything that any of us expected. And so who did that? We did that. That's not something, that wasn't an expectation that she set. That was an expectation that we had.
Even when I think about our episode 5, where we brought in our show and tell episodes for toxic relationships, I think our go-to was actual relationships for that episode. But I think now exploring it in this kind of expanded context of the album, we get this opportunity to really explore those other kinds of toxic relationships.
Yeah.
It also has some of that victoriousness of "But Daddy, I Love Him," but in a different way.
Different way.
Yeah.
I don't know if it feels victorious, but it's
redemption,
not,
maybe.
It's almost, even though, to me, as if she's saying, this was toxic, you really hurt me, oh my goodness, what's happening? Actually, you know what? You should be scared of me. It almost feels like pulling a mirror up and saying, you want this to be toxic? I'll show you toxic.
This is kind of an Elsa song. It's like when she goes into...
Oh, no. You're saying Elsa. I was going to say Elphaba with...
Oh, same. Oh, yeah. Similar. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
With Wicked coming around the corner.
It is very Elphaba.
So reminded
very
of
Elphaba.
Wicked.
But also Elsa, when she goes into the frozen tower and sings Let It Go. It's like, you know what?
Yes.
I'm not going to hold back anymore. This is who I am. I'm going
to let it free. But in the Elsa case, she actually ends up being a lovely human being. So
is Elphaba.
Yes, but Wicked, the whole idea is that the people is what kind of transformed her into the Wicked Witch. Or the perception.
Kind of the same people from But Daddy, I Love Him, actually.
Yeah, so there is this parallel to the fact that it's the society and the people who get to decide, and they...
Is this the first time we've brought up Wicked on the cast?
I think so.
That is awful if that's the case.
Well, we can pivot back into romance if we would like with our next song.
I love audiobooks. They make it so easy to read while walking the dog, commuting to work. And with Libro FM, I can buy audiobooks directly from my favorite local bookshops. Libro FM lets you pick from more than 450,000 audiobooks. They're the same audiobooks, the same price as that large audiobook company out there, but you're supporting your local bookshops instead. We have our own playlist of recommended books in our show notes. And as an AP Taylor Swift listener, you can get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 with your first month of membership. Use code APTS to claim your special offer and check out the books that we think Swifties will love at the link in our show notes. That's code APTS at Libro FM.
My first song that I thought of with this theme was I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can, in parentheses. Song number 11, Torture's Poet Department, and written by Jack Antonoff and Taylor Swift. My notes for this are the title, I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can. When I think of toxic relationships, that idea of women everywhere being like, I can fix him. I'm going to be the one to fix this tortured, deranged soul. That's what comes to mind. And there are other lyrics throughout this. I will say this song doesn't have a ton of lyrics. It's more repetitive and it's relatively short. But of course, there's the repeated, I can fix him, no, really, I can. She mentions, trust me, I can handle a dangerous man. And then it goes all the way down to the end where she actually ends up admitting, whoa, maybe I can't. And that's the maybe journey that one goes on to recognize this is out of my hands, this is out of my control. I think a lot of people experience this when coming to terms with the fact that they're in a toxic relationship. But this is kind of really classic case toxic in that when I think dangerous, I think of potential violence, harm, lying is mentioned in the song. It's really...
This is a toxic person, right? Like,
it's a toxic person.
Sometimes you have someone who's a bit more covert and you would never, you would think, oh my God, I would never think of that person as being such a terrible person in a relationship, terrible partner. This song paints a picture of the person who is just... no, you cannot fix him.
Yeah, and then the idea of being able to fix somebody comes hand in hand with the implication that that person is broken and therefore needs fixing. But the word dangerous is really what stood out to me, of not just broken. There's broken and being hurt and therefore acting out. But then in this case, when that gets to a level of danger where they can be harmful, that is really not a good place.
I almost brought My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys to this as another example of a toxic relationship, which would have been a good parallel to this song.
I was thinking that, and then I was thinking we're just going to be putting
exactly. So that if you're like, you missed the most obvious songs, it's like, well, we didn't want this to be a 2-hour, 2-minute
the whole album,
episode. Like, no.
I have 2 thoughts, one serious and one absolutely not serious. Great. But the serious one is, with this song, every time I hear it, the opening notes always remind me of the soundtrack to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
It sounds like a Western.
Which is, I think it might actually be the same note, which is a very interesting comparison. Those are not great men in those stories. So it was interesting. I remember the first time I heard this song, I was like, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And then we got into the song and I was like, I see where we were going with this, because you also have Texas roads and all of that. My unserious thought is this song reminds me of my relationship to my cat, because I have no control over him. I can do no training. Yet, yes, and he is looking at me right now. Yet I am talking.
You cannot fix me.
But I cannot fix this cat. He is what he is. And I think realistically, all of our most toxic relationships are probably with our pets, and we're all okay with them.
Please reference previous song. Who's afraid of little old me? It's so true. My next song was LOML, which going into it, I thought it was called 10 milliliters.
Never let it die. Never let it die.
But at first glance, you would think it would be a very positive song about the love of my life. Only after the album dropped did we learn it's actually referring to loss of my life. And Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner, who is the writer on this song as well, have single-handedly, I guess double-handedly, changed the meaning.
Double-handedly.
I don't know how to, because there's 2 of them. There's 2 writers. Okay, anyways. But here's why I think the song is about toxic relationships. There's a lot of lying. There's who's going to tell me the truth when you blew the winds of fate, told me I reformed you. Again, here we have that fixing of somebody trying to reform the other person. When your impressionist paintings of heaven turned out to be fakes, again, there's this lying element of I thought I was signing up for one thing, I'm getting something else. She says in the main chorus, you said I'm the love of your life about 1,000,000 times. That turns out not to be the case. Again, lying. But then there's plot twists and dynamite. Dynamite is explosions. Mr. Serial Girl makes her cry. I think any man that
this
makes
is textbook
people
bad.
cry,
This is just bad.
not good. Howard claimed he was a lion. More lies. And then our field of dreams engulfed in a fire. Your arsons match your somber eyes. I mean, we have some really violent references here with the fire and the crying and the dynamite. And so, yeah, just once again, themes of violence and toxicity throughout the song.
It reminds me of the first song of this question of the line between passion and it becoming toxic, of when the passion is so over consuming, you can move into this realm of willing to destroy yourself, to hurt yourself. I was thinking of the lines, it was legendary, it was momentary, it was unnecessary, and the combination of those three is insane to me. It was legendary, there was passion, it was so big, it was so real, it was momentary, it was so brief, it was unnecessary, should have let it stay buried.
Yeah. Another song that I'm reminded of, actually, with a lot of these specific lines that I called out, is very famous Eminem and Rihanna, Love the Way You Lie, which starts off as this beautiful ballad about a tortured relationships and turns into this very violent rap. And that too had it's Love the Way You Lie, so a lot of lying, but there's a lot of like fire. There was a music video that had the guy from Lord of the Rings in it. And it just was a really violent visual. And I could almost see this song and these lyrics being applied right to the music video of that song also, and it would work seamlessly.
Speaking of lying, I have our last song, which starts with a lie. The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, track 14, Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner, starts with, was any of it true? So right from the beginning, just gotta drop some lies there.
I feel like that's a stretch. Can you give me more evidence?
Can I give you more evidence? I don't know. Gazing at me starry-eyed?
Maybe the answer is yes.
Yes, it was true. And it's so hard because I want to skip right down to the bridge, which is just like the most, I think I would like to crown this the best bridge of a Taylor Swift song ever. Maybe, but I won't go that far yet.
I think the internet has maybe already kind of.
It probably already has. But again, how much of that was also the performance of it? Probably a lot of it. Anyway.
Oh, yes.
In particular, I think the second burst does a really good job of highlighting some of the toxicity here. You hung me on your wall, stabbed me with your push pins, in public showed me off, then sank in stoned oblivion. Because once your queen had come, you treat her like an also ran. You didn't measure up in any measure of a man, which is also might be the best little couplet ever of chef's kiss.
Would it be your MySpace?
My aim away message, yes. If I was really pissed at someone, you didn't measure up in any measure of a man. Yeah, so I think throughout this whole song, she paints a picture, yes, of a liar, a con man, but someone who also was just completely dishonest, unsupportive, who really isolates her. Just create, again, the bridge. Were you sent by someone who wanted me dead? Did you sleep with a gun underneath her bed? It is just attack after attack after attack of this is someone who created such hostility and torture and pain in her life that I would have died for your sins. Instead, I just died inside. I have nothing else to say other than the lyrics of the song. I'm like, here you go. I'm doing a terrible job of analyzing it because I'm like, she said it. She's been very, very explicit with what is wrong here and what this person did. Unlike some of the other songs we discussed today, which paint a picture, like I go back to I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can. She just described the person and why his characteristics that we were like, oh, this is a dangerous person. In this song, we have things that she felt he did to her.
In talking through these songs in the order that we're going through, I'm now seeing real narrative unfolding. We have the Tortured Poets Department, the chorus, the intro, setting the stage. You have But Daddy, I Love Him, where you're maybe convincing people you don't really quite see it as toxic yet, but everybody's telling you. Who's Afraid of Little Me is a continuation of that. I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can is really trying to make it work, but starting to come to terms with this might not be the right thing. Love of My Life, and then Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, or Loss of My Life and Smallest Man Who Ever Lived are really coming to terms with the ending of the relationship. And Smallest Man Who Ever Lived specifically is now on the other side. It's her looking back at a toxic relationship. And so you go through this entire journey, which
we just picked 6 songs.
I mean, we just picked out a few songs. There's obviously more songs in the album, but you still follow that arc.
We just picked, it also just so happens that all of these songs are off the original album.
Yeah.
None of these are the anthology songs either, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, when I listened to this album, I think like most of us or many of us, I listened to just all 31 at once. But when you start to listen to just the first part of the album, part 1, I guess, alone, you do see this cohesiveness in that, and that arc, that story arc in the album.
Well, and she talks about a manuscript, and then she's been talking about this theater name. What's the theater?
Female Rage, the musical?
Yeah, the musical. I don't know. It does read a lot like theatrical play. Like you have this arc. But yeah, all of these, definitely toxic relationship, and that last one I just think is interesting because it's that after perspective, which I think in episode 5 when we were discussing toxic relationships, we were also very much in the moment, and now we have something where
we have perspective here. I mean, still a lot of anger. It still feels very close to it, but it's definitely over it, definitely past it.
There's so much nuance in these things. Taking it a little bit back to literature, we did an episode on Pride and Prejudice, and I think the main relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice, I could see modern readers today sometimes interpreting that as a little bit toxic because there is a lot of misunderstanding. There is often some anger. There's some fighting.
A little bit of pride, a little bit of prejudice.
Her family is quite confused when she decides, actually, I do want to marry him. But one of the things I've seen over and over again, going back to I Can Fix Him, No Really Can, and all of these things, is that with that story, she did not try to fix him. They did not feel this connection where they were going to blow up their lives without each other. They challenged each other and they learned from each other and they grew from that. That there's a difference between
trying to change someone. Yeah.
That codependency but then there's a world where if you're with someone for a long time, you will change because of them.
Right. Very different.
Because that's how life works. And that's such a thin line, and we are not qualified to determine that for anyone. But I think that I have seen some modern folks wonderfully want to avoid these toxic things, but there's nuance there, and I think there just needs to be self-reflection, and I think we see that in these songs. We see the self-reflection where we're going on that journey to the end of maybe that wasn't great. I'm not in that anymore, and that's a good thing. And then there's other things that it's, hey, I'm going to go do this thing now, and that is good. And I just think that that's interesting that we see so many versions of it in this album, and people like to sometimes pinpoint things and then criticize them. And I really think the anthology was meant to be taken as a whole, which is why it's interesting to see us take 6 songs and see them in this narrative together.
Yeah, it's like it starts off the same way, but then how the story branches determines where it's going, and then you have a different outcome than what you might expect from some classic literature.
Well, we did it.
First summer school session. It was legendary.
It was momentary.
Momentary.
It was necessary.
And it was necessary.
It wasn't planned.
Yeah. Hopefully you all enjoy this as much as we're enjoying putting it together.
And join us next time on the next episode of AP Taylor Swift
Summer School.
That's all we have for you today on AP Taylor Swift. Be sure to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on your social channel of choice at AP Taylor Swift to stay up to date. And join us next time as we overanalyze and deep dive into the next Taylor Swift song on AP Taylor Swift.